Still there? Okay. We're going to move on to the next stage. I'm going to extend this into a chromatic grisaille by starting to bring in some color, okay, into the underpaint, which eventually I'm going to let dry and put another color over the top before I start painting it in earnest. So this is just a preparatory stage of the painting that we're going to work through. I've got two more colors out on the canvas. On the palette here, okay, you can see them squeezed out. All right, which is this. Let's get the light right for you. It's Gamleon's Radiant Red, okay, and again Gamleon Radiant Magenta, okay. They're two fairly similar colors tonally, okay. The Radiants are colors with lots of white in them, okay, and I tend to use them during underpainting like this just to help me to establish a kind of light and shade structure to the image, but also lay down some colors which will modify the colors that I lay down in later layers, if you like. So these are going to filter through and affect the work that I do on top. Oil paint being mostly transparent to some extent, okay, and probably slightly more transparent over time, okay. So I'm going to work with these two colors, and I'm going to put the lights back into that. I'm using the same brush that I used. I haven't cleaned it. It's still got asphaltum on it, okay. So that some of the Gamblin asphaltum from underneath will mix into the top layer that I'm going to work on at the moment. I'm going to start with the red, okay, the Radiant Red. I'm not using very much terps with this, okay, so, and I'm using really small amounts of paint. It's very, very thin. I don't want it too thick. You tend to work thin in the underlayers of painting. Think back to the presentation that I've put up. Okay, thin layers first, thick layers after. We're working with turpentine, so this is a lean layer, okay, and there's not much oil in it. Okay, it's called lean. And then as we work on, we'll introduce more oil into the painting, and it'll be a thicker layers, and there'll be fatty layers as we work thicker through the painting, okay. But to start off with, thin and lean, okay. Gamblin theoretically have devised the paint, so you don't really need to use much medium with it. I still like to add a little terps to it, or mineral spirits, just to thin it out at the start, okay. It's easier to use, and the paint layer is that much thinner, okay. But you can work with it neat if you want. It will take longer to dry, okay. Yeah, I'm going to use the red on this brick. There's a red and a magenta. They're relatively similar, okay. But they are similarly colored bricks in front of me, okay. But they are also different, so I'm starting to introduce some of that difference early on. But with the left brick, this one is much richer in color, okay. It's much more dense and rich, so I'm going to use the magenta on that because it's a slightly more rich purpley color than this red, which I'm using here, which is much more similar to the background, if you like, which is good, okay, at this point. This is an undertone, okay. My plan is with this painting, and I just thought about this now, I'm going to, I'm probably, when this dries, going to put a thin layer of phthalo green over it, okay, phthalocyanine green, okay, which is quite a intense color, okay, but it's a transparent color, so I'm going to use it very, very thin and try and put that over. I've not done much with green as an underpaint before, okay, so it's something I'd like to try. I've tried to use these bricks to experiment with technique, as well as produce images that I'm happy with, that I'm interested in making. So the green also makes me think of the sea, okay, and seaweed and harbors, and the rich kind of vegetation of the seaside, okay. and C's as well. So I'm gonna use that and put it in, but it'll be a very thin layer that will barely be seen towards the end of it. Okay. Now, when I'm painting in using the red, I'm just modifying the background slightly. Okay, I don't want to take off too much of that, otherwise we'll lose the first layer completely. I don't really want that. Okay, I want that brown to stay there. Okay, because it helps to unify the painting, pull it all together. Okay, so you don't want patches suddenly and raw canvas at this point. But these edges can be soft because we'll reconfigure them as we work through. So we've got a dense shadow here. I'm going to take some paint off the brush. Okay, so I'm working with a little thinner. Under here we've got reflected light. The asphaltum here is a little bit thicker, so I can afford to be slightly thinner with the paint that I'm using. I'm just dabbing, okay, and working it in. And then I can soften and manipulate that slightly. Okay, and then I'm going to use the asphaltum again because I've lost that shadow. Okay, by introducing the reflected light. Now my reflected light shouldn't be as strong as the light that's on the top. Okay. So I'm just going to dab in some asphaltum there. Okay. And bring the shadow back out again. Okay. I'm going to use the asphaltum here just to introduce some more shadow at this part. This interesting form here where it dips in. Okay, it dips in into shadow. And then there's a very faint, subtle, soft internal contour line running through here. Okay, where the reflected light takes a lead again. Okay, it's very subtle. It's coming through here. And just sits in front of the form behind it that the shadow's on. So I'll suggest that. It's a bit sloppy, that painting I've just done there. Let's tidy it up. And it curves around into the front form of the brick. Okay, it's a funny, complex form. You can see the shadow under the brick looks a little loose as well. Let's just sharpen that up a little at this point. Just going to suggest it for now. That helps me to push that curve back in as well, back into the brick. Okay. So you can use the background to define the foreground. Okay. Use the negative space to define the form. I am simplifying the shadow in here somewhat. Okay, it's far more complex in the model, but I want to keep it a little simpler than that. Okay. I'm going to darken the shadows in the cavities here at the top where they need it, and in the bottom they are reflecting much more light, so I'll leave them as they are. And this one is just a little bite of shadow here, so I'll just fleck that in for now, and it's a suggestion of depth and space within the form. Okay, we'll look at this area in a moment. I don't like this here, but I'm gonna work with the brick first. Okay, let's work back with magenta. I'm not bothering to clean the brush here. I'm just gonna pick up some magenta. Okay. It's a bit too much terps I've mixed in. I'm just wiping the brush. Okay. And then remixing to thicken that solution somewhat. Okay, so we're going to work this second brick. I tend to start in the highlighted areas. I'm using the radiance to introduce light and to maintain light within the drawing early. Okay. It's good to keep light in the painting for as long as you can. Okay. Because you can always darken, you can always add more tone through glazing, adding thin layers of color. But light tends to help your colors to breathe. Okay, it keeps a sense of openness and light in the work. Although generally speaking, my work is on the dark side. Okay. So this area, as we work into it, it needs to be slightly different. There's reflected. There's a kind of light hitting the surface. Okay, at the edges, there's a little bit more shadow on this edge. So I'm going to work that in, allowing it to mix with the thicker asphaltum that I had underneath. But I'm gonna bring some asphaltum back into that as well. Just to deepen the tone, take a little bit out of the color quality on this edge, on this plane. Okay. Take some light back down this corner, keeping it soft. No edges to define. It's a very soft form. I've painted edges as though it's very hard and crisp, and it isn't. Okay, so I need to soften those as they turn around. And I'm redrawing as I go. Okay. I'm working on a sense of reflection, so the surface will be receiving light from above. So I'm working in my still life out here. I've got a light base. So when I work around the bottom edge, I can afford to put a light edge underneath. Okay, because there will be light received from below, okay, onto the object. So let's continue. Now this comes up a little higher than I've done it here. A little bit higher, and then it slopes down and slopes in. And the light here is reasonably strong. So this is a difficult area. Okay. There's light on the surface, there's shadow here as it curves back in, but it's very subtle. I need to be able to explain the form, but also get the subtlety of that. So I'm just going to drag some of this color in without really going crazy with it. And just blend the edges somewhat as it comes around. Okay. Now, we move quite suddenly here from light on the surface to shadow. Okay, so I'm gonna mix some asphaltum back in. Okay, and let that fall away, and then I'll use a mixture of the two lower down here as a kind of chromatic grey. Yeah. To me, that's not reading very well as a form at the moment. This doesn't make sense really to me as a form. I need to figure out why that is. I'm gonna lift this edge somewhat here. To broaden the curve. Okay. And I'm just going to curve the bottom edge a little bit more steeply. Okay. Here, so that it flattens this perspective a little and works better with the back edge of what is a weirdly shaped brick. Okay. It's very worn by the sea, okay, which is partly why I picked it. Okay. So a little bit of texture on this edge. It is sometimes collecting light, other times in shadow. It's varied and is generally slightly lighter here than in this area here. So I'm trying to maintain the subtlety of that, whilst also explain that it's a different plane, okay, and that there's shadow here. It's very, very subtle, okay. And then what we have here is shadow cast by the other stone. Okay. I'm just going to take the brick around first, so I understand what my form is doing. Just that much. Then I'm going to take it back into the painting. And then I need to look at that shadow and where those edges meet. Some contrasts you want to be very subtle, like this area here, these transitions. Other areas where there is a strong shadow and there are shapes meeting, you want to crisp them up and have them a little bit more firm so that there's variety in those edges. So I'm just pushing the asphalt. I mean, it's not at full density because it's picking up some of the magenta from underneath, but that's fine at this stage. Okay, I think it's sensible early in the painting like this to hold off on the full expression of your lights and your darks. Okay. You can work towards that later in the painting. Okay. And we can look at some other shadows too. Okay. Let's look at this corner, just so that sits behind the other stone. Take it down. It's a little bit fudged at the moment. That's not good enough, so yeah, that's a little bit more like it. Could do a quick review at this point and just look at it generally. I'm going to suggest a little shadow behind. Where I'm working, I have two light sources. I have a light bulb and I have the window, which is why I've got light hitting here and light hitting here. So at some point, I'm going to need to simplify that. Probably now. I'm going to just simplify this edge here. Because it's a nice edge to take back into the painting. Okay. So that this edge recedes and this area comes forward. Okay. So I'm going to make a decision on the light early there. Okay. Now you can see where I'm dragging, you can see the marks. Okay. When I flick like this back and forth, you tend to lose the marks just a little bit more. Okay. really hate this edge. Yeah. Just going to try and sort that out. Okay. I'll use the first asphaltum brush. Okay. Just to put that back in. I'm not defining it too much. Okay. I just want to lose that in a slightly less structured way than I did originally. Yeah. Okay. Shadows don't really work for me at this point. I'm just going to work with those for a little bit. I'm going to bring this one out a little more. And take that into the other one a little bit softer. Okay. And I'm just softening that edge a little, even though it's close to us. There's enough contrast here, here, and here for me to allow that to dissolve a little. Okay. I will firm it up later on, but tonally, I think that's okay. Yeah. I'll just bring this front shadow out a little further. Again, it's one we want to be stronger later. Okay. Remembering a little of the reflection. Yeah. That I'm going to work with again. Okay. That pretty much wraps up where I wanted to start with you. Okay. This is the first pass, if you like, of the painting. So this is a chromatic grisaille. Okay, grisaille from French, all the greys. Okay. We started with asphaltum. Okay, it's given me a tonal structure and a composition to work with for the rest of the painting. From our 2 bricks from Crosby. Okay, and then I've worked back in with a radiant. Okay, so a color with some white to lift the tonal aspects of the drawing and to separate the figure from the ground. Okay, I'll be working back over it now with a thin layer of phthalo green. Okay, which is here. Okay, I'll show you. You see that? Okay. That's quite intense, so I'm going to have to put that on really, really thin. Okay. When I do it, I'll let you know. All right. So I hope you enjoy your oil painting. Let me know how you get on.